Hello, welcome to Post Colonial Space. I'm Masood Raja, and today I'll briefly talk about literature and the question of care of others. Now, this is also part of my forthcoming book, but I thought I should just share my general ideas about it. So, what do I mean by literature and care of the others? Now, you might have noticed in your literature classes, or sometimes literature professors like me and others, when we're talking to other people and they ask us about, okay, what's the significance of teaching literature in 21st century, we offer different kind of responses. Sometimes the response is totally utilitarian. Oh, it would make our students into critical thinkers and then they can do their jobs better. On a higher level of abstraction, sometimes people would argue in terms of the value of literature. And that value to them is that it can make us into better people, right? You can qualify the term better, but by and large, the idea is that teaching literature or studying literature can make people into more responsible citizens, more responsible human beings, more compassionate human beings. And that is what we usually assume about literature. And this is the question that occasionally emerges in my classes as well, especially when I'm teaching non-literature majors. My personal opinion, of course, is that you absolutely do not need literary studies to be a better human being. Actually, you don't even need any education. Any person in the world who has lived experiences and reflects upon them and interacts with other people can become a compassionate, caring, and wonderful human being. So there is no distinction that this person has studied literature, so automatically this person is better than others. I absolutely do not buy into that mythology, right, or that fiction. But given the world in which we exist, if you look at the university system, the educational system, most of the times people are being trained to go work for someone. They are being trained to acquire certain skills and then go and get a job and do the work that they are trained for. Now, there is no room in there, especially in neoliberal capital or in advanced societies or even in developing societies, to develop alongside professional skills any thinking methodologies that encourage us to think about fellow human beings differently, to develop compassion, empathy. Now, chances are, if you follow any particular religion that is grounded in care of others, maybe you will take those values with you and take them to the job or the expertise that you develop. And I think that is where literature and literary studies or humanistic education can play a huge role. A huge role in training our students, not about thinking about themselves, but also about their obligations and responsibilities to others. But reading books by itself may not be able to accomplish that. Actually, research shows that being well-read can often make you into more arrogant, more single-minded in your opinions. So how does then literary studies or humanistic studies enable us to develop these compassionate, expansive selves, right? So many scholars and philosophers have tried to answer this question. In all the cases, we know that it does not happen automatically, that it needs to be a painstaking process of pedagogy. And that pedagogy has to come across as not something top-down, but it has to develop students' identities, strengthen them, because it is only the strong identities, right, that go out and are okay with the difference. If you have an insecure identity, chances are you will close off anyone who looks different or acts different. And that is where I think literary studies can help. How? I mean, think of it. I just recently taught 4 novels, one from Nigeria, one from Kenya, right? One from India. Now, I can either teach them as ossified pieces of information imaginatively restored in a novel, or I can point to certain, what my former colleague Mark Bracker calls commonalities of experience, right? I can look at the suffering of a character, let's say in Buchi Yamashita's novel, right, Joys of Motherhood. And instead of asking my students to look at it from this perspective of their American self and then just locate it within the Nigerian urban culture, I can ask them to share their ideas, their emotions about Noego, right, the main character. And in the process, they will realize that what she is going through, every other human being can also experience the same kind of things. And when they start making that connection, then this character in a novel coming from Africa becomes a fellow human being to them, right? And in that way, what they're developing in the process of reading and talking about the novel and sharing their feelings is developing empathy for a character, but then by extension for other people like her in their close proximity as well as at far-flung places. So literature can teach us the care of others, compassion for others, respect for others, but only when it is taught carefully, when we use critical methodologies that don't just focus on mastering the language, mastering the metaphor, and then writing about it, but that encourages us to think, sometimes emotionally, right, about the characters in a story, about the characters in a novel, and then share those feelings in a classroom. So what's the science behind it? Now, according to the research of so many psychologists and psychiatrists and the work of Mark Bracker, one thing that happens when we enter any new literary text or any new classroom, what we are focused on is the protection of our own idea of self, our own identity. So if a professor just pushes us to read a text that sounds foreign or may not correspond with our ideas of what constitutes the norm, instead of learning from that text, we will try to close it off because our emphasis would be on protecting our identity. Now, our ideas of others cannot be shifted, cannot be changed unless our idea of self, the schemas upon which it is built, is changed, right? Now, reason cannot do that. Simply critical reading a text cannot do that. Only developing a range of feeling towards the characters and thus by extension the cultures that they represent, only sharing feelings about them, how do we feel, why do we feel like that, can enable us to expand our idea of self. And only when our idea of self is expanded through repetition, through constantly sharing our feelings and thoughts about a text, can we then move on to this stage where we wouldn't see those who are different from us as a threat, but as fellow human beings. So this is kind of an extremely reducted form of what Mark Bracker does and what people like Erik Erikson and others have written about. But the idea is pretty simple, and that is to look for commonalities in the text, to break it down to our students, to encourage them to engage with the text without top-down pressure on them to, have smart opinions or brilliant opinions, but human opinions, right? And to let them see these living, breathing characters in the pages of a book, and then through questioning, simple questions of feeling, encouraging them to think differently about those texts. How do I do it in my own classes? It's pretty simple, right? First of all, I always tell my students to develop two modes of thinking about their experience with the text in my classes. Ask yourself, why do I think the way I think about a given character, a given situation, a given novel? And that will give them an account of their thought processes. And then also ask yourself, why do I feel the way I feel? And if they start questioning their feelings, okay, you read about a character, you don't like them, right? That's a feeling. Ask yourself, okay, why don't I like this character? Is it because of what he or she doing? Or is it because of my idea of this group of people or this identity group? And that will start you thinking not just about the character, but about your own worldview, about your own ideas. And I think that eventually will enable most students to expand their ideas of self and hence incorporate more difference in it. Not incorporate it, but be comfortable with it. With my science students or STEM field students, another thing that I do is I connect any text that they read to their own personal lives. You know, we read a short story. It's about injustice. It's about rights of one constituency or the other. And then I ask them, okay, when you go into your field, whatever it is, medicine, engineering, keep this in mind. There'll be people who will come to you who will be completely different from you. And if they are, how can you treat them as worthy of your respect, worthy of your time? Because if you do that, you'll be a more effective doctor, you'll be a more effective engineer, and chances are you yourself would like to be treated fairly in the world. So these are some of my thoughts, highly simplified versions of critical pedagogy as well as radical pedagogy by Mark Brocker. I do encourage you to at least read once in your life Mark Brocker's Radical Pedagogy. I'll place the link in the description. And, of course, Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Overall, I do believe that literature, carefully taught with a certain degree of patience, can generate amongst our students a sense of compassion and care and empathy for others. But it doesn't do so automatically. That is all today. Thank you so much for your time. Please take care of yourself and others around you. I will now see you next time. Until then, as always, peace and love.